Good morning. Today on Spotlight, we'll talk to Pontiac Mayor Tim Grimel. After 1 year in office, what's been happening in one of Oakland County's most historic and important cities. And later, we'll turn our attention to Michigan's charter schools through the eyes of two of its leaders, Dan Quisenberry, president of MAPSA, and former state senator Buzz Thomas, the chair of MAPSA. And he's also the leader of his own consulting firm, Activate Detroit. It's Sunday, January the 29th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. A year in the seat. How's it going?
It's been going well. We knew that the first year would be focused on some of the fundamentals of city government, reorganizing departments, making sure that we have the right personnel in place, and improving basic day-to-day city services. And that really has been the primary focus in the first year. But we were also able to accomplish some other more substantive policy-oriented goals, and we've got a lot on the plate for this coming year in terms of really moving the city forward. We have brought a number of services in-house that city emergency managers privatized and outsourced. So we have bulked up the DPW department to make sure that we're plowing the streets promptly, to make sure that we're filling potholes promptly. We also have bulked up our community development department to make sure that we have enough staff to issue building permits on time, to make sure we have code enforcement inspectors out there on the streets cracking down on blight. And we also have formed a grants department that has already brought in millions of dollars of additional revenue into the city.
Okay. You focused a fair amount of attention on youth development and recreation centers. Has that been going the direction you want?
It really has. And I would say that of all of the programs that we've been active on and that we're continuing to pursue, that is probably the single most important policy aspect to our administration. We have a brand new youth recreation manager who's been doing amazing work, Tanisha Taylor, and beginning last summer we had 1,000 young people in our youth recreation and enrichment programs. These are programs that aren't just sports and athletics, but also art and music, entrepreneurship classes, making sure that we're developing our young people so that they can live up to their full potential in life. We have consolidated our planning division, our building division, and our economic development division all within one community development department. And the goal there is to break down those silos, make sure that different staff that are involved in development work and job creation in the community are talking with each other, are working together, and ultimately streamlining the processes and cutting bureaucratic red tape so that residents and businesses alike can more easily navigate city government.
What's the plans for 2023 now that you've got this first year up under you?
Bringing downtown Pontiac back to life. And that really is all about bringing more residents who are living in and around downtown. That will generate the foot traffic that will sustain more restaurants and bars and other activities downtown, but also trying to bring some additional businesses downtown and additional employees downtown to also bolster those efforts. Really investing in neighborhoods, and that includes certainly improving city services, which I already touched on, but it also includes an exciting new program that City Council recently approved that once it's established and up and running will cover half of the down payment requirement for home buyers in the city. We want to make sure that we're assisting more tenants, more renters transitioning to home ownership, and also a newly approved program that will help homeowners make needed improvements and renovations to their houses.
All right, we need to get a little quick pause for the calls in here. We'll come right back and we'll talk about perhaps some help that you may get from Lansing and that you may get from the County of Oakland. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Mr. Mayor, the governor just gave her State of the State address. A couple weeks she'll have to present her budget. Much different backdrop than 40 years ago when Jim Blanchard took over as governor. The state faced a record deficit. He fixed a lot of that during his 8 years in there. This governor starts her second term with a 9 plus something billion-dollar surplus.
Yeah.
That's a whole lot of bacon to dole out with the legislature. What would you like out of that pork barrel?
Yeah. Well, I think investment in older central cities. We have not seen the level of investment by the state or by the federal government in central cities here in Michigan.
And you're talking about infrastructure primarily? Or?
Well, I'm talking about a variety of things. Certainly, housing is a critical need right now. Housing cost inflations have hit all Michiganders really hard as they are struggling to pay their rent or as they're struggling to buy a house for the first time. So that's one important priority, but also roads, obviously, underground infrastructure, water and sewer. A lot of older communities, including Pontiac, were under emergency management, and as we saw in Flint, and I could point to examples in Detroit and Pontiac and elsewhere, emergency managers did more damage than they solved in many instances, and they were a creation of the state. And so I think there's a clear case to be made that the state has and should have a role to remedy some of those problems that were created by emergency management.
You're a Democratic mayor with a Democratic trifecta, first time in 40 years in Lansing. Will you be disappointed if a lot of the things you just talked about don't come your way because all the power's down there with them right now, and for you it's the right party?
Well, I certainly would be disappointed, but I don't think
And you used to be part of the legislature and leadership, so you understand how Lansing works.
Well, that's true, and that's why I say I certainly would be disappointed if we didn't see those needed investments materialize, but I don't think I will be disappointed. And I say that because I've already had conversations with the governor's office and with key legislative leaders in both the House and the Senate. And I know that they are focused on delivering for Michigan residents, including certainly investing in central cities. So I would encourage people on both sides of the aisle, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, to work together to focus on problem solving and really moving the state forward in a way that benefits Michigan's families.
Has Oakland County Executive Coulter and the Oakland County Commission been helpful?
Very much so. I served with both County Executive Dave Coulter on the Oakland County Commission many years ago now, 10 plus years ago. I served with now Chair of the Oakland County Commission, Dave Woodward, during that same period, so I have a good relationship with both of them, as I do with many legislators who are still in Lansing, and as I do with the governor. So those relationships, I think, will certainly help Pontiac get its fair share of investment moving forward.
You touched on it. You said certainly the Pontiac at times has had a troubled past. Do you feel as though that image and the perception that people have, which is the county seat for Oakland, so it's an important government center, that is changing among the average person, safety, all those things that play into it?
Well, perception always lags reality a little bit. And so I know that the reality is changing, but I think perception is going to lag a little bit behind the changed reality. I know that County Executive Coulter prioritizes Pontiac as Oakland County's seat of government. I know that other layers of government prioritize Pontiac. We are turning the corner. We are making Pontiac a much safer place. If you look at crime statistics like shootings and other violent crime stats, those were down substantially in 2022 compared to previous years. So we're turning the corner, but I know that the first step to any change in perception is changing the reality.
Education and gun control, those are things the governor talked about in her State of the State. They have a very, they being Democrats, have a very slim majority in both houses. Do you believe that those are two issues in which there can be bipartisan progress?
I would hope so, and I'll add a third area to that. I think, number one, certainly investing in education, tutors, quality early childhood education. These are important to make our state more competitive nationally and internationally, and certainly to help make up the learning gap that occurred and the loss of learning that occurred during COVID. So I think that is an opportunity for bipartisan collaboration. I do think that some common sense Measures like universal background checks are an area where people of goodwill can come together no matter their party. And third, some targeted tax relief for those who need it most. The working poor and seniors really need and deserve tax relief, and that's another area where I hope Democrats and Republicans will be able to work together.
All right, Mr. Mayor, thanks so much for coming in, bringing
you.
us up to date after your first year in office. We will get you back because you got a few years to go.
Thank you for having me, Chuck. Great to see you as always.
All right, it's always a pleasure. And when we come back, we'll turn our attention to leadership with charter schools. Dan Quisenberry and former colleague of the mayor's, Buzz Thomas. What's on your wish list for 2023? Dan, we'll start with you.
I think it's important, Chuck, I would compliment you, the focus on kids, because everything we've been through in the last 3 years as a state, as a country, frankly, how are we getting kids back on track? That's what the voters want to know. It's what parents want to know. So our wish.
We know that scores have gone down nationally. COVID, just wreaked havoc on all of that.
And even the polar vortex in 1819 had an impact on learning time. So the wish list, Chuck, is how do we, as a state, focus ourselves back on how do we get kids back on track and make the most of our education system. And charter schools are an important part of that.
Right.
Yeah, Chuck, thanks for the opportunity. I think folks will be surprised that our wish list is no different from your other guests.
Okay.
We certainly hope to hear the governor talk about more funding for schools. We want to help students that have been harmed and lost learning capacity during COVID make up and catch up. And we hope that this legislature, with Democrats in control of all of the branches of state government, that they really double down and increase funding to K-12 schools. And we're a part of that K-12 public school system, and like the others, we're excited for the opportunities ahead.
Sure. You were in the legislature for 14 years. You were in leadership positions, both in the House and in the Senate. You've lobbied and worked with legislators from both sides of the political aisle for, since 1998, I think is when you became president of MAP. So you know what you're dealing with here. We're now in a Democratic trifecta. Do you envision anything being different? Do you feel that they're going to really come after you, the Democrats, and say, okay, let's cut up the funding for charter schools? We know that the MEA and other organizations were very instrumental in helping the governor get elected.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks have that fear, but I don't. So we're charter public schools, and half the kids of Detroit and Flint and cities across Michigan are going and waking up every morning and going to a charter public school in their community. And so I don't think that Democrats will look to punish those students and their parents who have made choices, their best choices for their kids. They've been a part of Michigan's public education system for more than 30 years, and really vulnerable kids in communities across the state depend on their schools. And so I would expect folks will challenge us to be accountable for the money that we receive, and we need to ensure that when we're making investments in charter public schools, that those dollars go to student education, and so they'll challenge us to be transparent and accountable that way.
Paint a picture of what the charter school movement is in Michigan right now.
Important question, Chuck. And so, yeah, it's accepted by the public. Broad support, growing support. We are part of the public education
People who voted
system.
with their feet, basically.
Absolutely. And it's not political, to Buzz's point, it's not political or partisan. What parents want, particularly after the last few years, options. They know their kids are individuals, they learn individually. Educators like to teach in unique ways. So we have a system in Michigan that charter schools are part of where you can design varying educational options. Parents want to make that decision.
Should that even buttress your argument when it used to be you guys are taking resources from the public education system, the quote unquote traditional K-12 public education system, and that you're hurting the system by doing that. Is that argument not worth it anymore because there is so much money and potentially enough money to go around for everybody if legislators decide to put lots of money, more money into public education? Because they put a historic amount of money in last year, but everybody says we're just trying to catch up. We aren't where we're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're really fortunate that we have a visionary governor that made education funding the hallmark of her first term in office. And so, as you said, we made record. She made with legislative partners a record contribution to K-12. But I think I read yesterday that the state has a $9.2 billion budget surplus projected.
Yeah, pretty soon we'll start talking real money, right?
Right. It's real money. So I would have every expectation that the governor and the legislature would make additional funding of K-12 education really important. And I also think that they'll make early childhood investments and tutoring some of the really important projects that the governor proposed in 2022 a reality.
We'll be right back right after this. What makes it easier to accomplish those things that you just talked about? If the money follows the students or if the money goes to the institutions?
Really important question. You asked about how much money there is, and I agree with Buzz. That'll be a priority for the governor.
And the reason I asked that, to stop you for just a second, I think I saw a figure, something like 1 in 6 since COVID, is that parents move their kids around. So they may send them to a particular charter school, and a couple of years later, they may be at a different charter school. So if the money is following the kid, then it's going wherever they and their parents are making the decision. But if it's just going to the institution, and say that particular institution is not doing as well as some other charter schools.
Sounds simple, Chuck, but you just nailed it. Are we funding students and education based on their needs, or are we funding institutions and there's winners or losers? We got an equity issue in Michigan, and the proposal that's been out there through the Finance Collaborative report, there's broad agreement about is funding students on a per pupil basis, but weighting it for needs like English language learners, at risk, poverty, they get a little bit more. And then those dollars follow the kid. The budget hasn't been following it that way the last several years, even going back in the previous administration. So yes, let's fund kids. We can address that equity issue. Parents have those options then.
Right. Buzz Thomas, let me do a quote that you had a while back. You were talking about a report that had come out from the Civil Rights Commission. You agreed with a lot of what they said, but at one part you said it's inaccurate and it's insulting in the descriptions of charter schools, and that it disproportionately attacks Black and brown students.
Yeah, so
you still feel that way?
Well, the context of that report at the time said that charter schools should receive at least 25, maybe 50% less funding than other public schools. And I viewed that as punitive. And frankly arbitrary, and so they didn't really say why charter schools should be funded differently than other public schools. So I was very pleased that the Civil Rights Commission changed their draft report and took that out. So what they talked about in their report, I would agree with the conclusions that they reached, that all children have a right to a great public education in the state of Michigan, and they are supporting that, and they hope that others support it. So I would not feel that way about the work of the Civil Rights Commission now, because they corrected what I viewed as their error, and they should be applauded for making that correction.
Sure. What are you hearing from parents? What do charter school parents say that they want that perhaps they feel they're not getting now or not getting enough of?
Good question, and we certainly hear it from charter school parents. I would make this statement because we watch what's public opinion, what are parents saying, all parents. They want to know what that plan is. How are we going to get our kids back on track? We don't expect it right away, but we want to know what that plan is. And then I want a response to understand that my child's unique. Think families, wherever they live, 2, 3, 4 kids, you actually have the opportunity in Michigan to send them to different schools, and parents will do that because their kids need different things.
Just because of budget challenges that the state's had over the past 20 years, there have been some communities that have lost their schools. And so parents also want the ease of getting to schools, and many times charter public schools have filled gaps in communities where you've had school closures. And so the charter option has been the only option within a neighborhood or close by for a parent. And so we can't discount the challenges of working parents that they have in making sure that their kids have that ready access to a nearby school and a school that can accommodate their schedules.
Dan Quisenberry, do charter schools outperform the traditional public education schools?
Academic performance is always argued by people, but the reality is, yes, they're doing well, more likely to be proficient, more likely to succeed and graduate. But Chuck, everybody needs to be doing better. I'm going to make that statement, and I think everybody in my space would agree with that. There's been a hit after the last 3 years, and everybody's performance has gone down. But they also come in and say, how you doing next year and 5 years from now? I need to know that.
Sure. Buzz Thomas, you're a Democrat. You're a huge Detroit booster. You consult with all sorts of people on all sorts of things. And the title of your consulting group probably accentuates that. Recently renamed it Activate Detroit. When I don't know if you've had time yet because they're just getting into leadership positions with new Speaker of the House, Joe Tate, leader of the Senate over from Grand Rapids. What are you going to say to them?
Policymakers, they have the ultimate final decision, and they make those decisions with the information presented. And we just simply ask for an opportunity to make our case and to share what we think are important points for them to consider.
Dan Quisenberry, Buzz Thomas, thanks for coming in. I imagine you'll be watching the governor closely when she presents her budget to the legislature in just a few weeks.
Thank you, Chuck.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
Chuck.
you so much. Well, that's it for this week. I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more newsmakers in the spotlight. We hope you have a great week.